Hello and welcome everyone to the Renfrew Center Foundation's webinar, Embodied Exercise Practices in Recovery. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Erin Byerly and I'm your Alumni Services Coordinator. And I'll be your moderator for today's online presentation. So I'd like to now introduce you to today's presenter. To start, we've got Becky Mayer, MSRD, CEDRD, SLDN. And Becky is the Director of Outpatient Nutrition for the Renfrew Centers and serves as the registered dietitian at the Renfrew Center of Nashville. So Becky received her bachelor's degree in dietetics from Lipscomb University and her master's degree in clinical nutrition from the University of Memphis. Her presentations locally and nationally focus on the topics of exposure therapy, diabetes and eating disorders, and she is a member of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals, and the Tennessee Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And then her co-presenter today is Kristen Responti, BSHS MOT. And Kristen is the exercise coordinator and group therapist at the Renfrew Center of Philadelphia. Kristen received her bachelor's degree in exercise science and wellness management and her master's degree in occupational therapy from the University of the Sciences in Philadelphia. Kristen's background experience covers a wide range of settings and populations, including providing physical activity education and working with individuals with developmental disabilities. So I will hand it over to Becky and Kristen.
Thanks, Erin. And to get started, we'll just provide you with an outline of our webinar today. We're going to provide some general education on exercise and the relationship with eating disorders, as well as a little bit of a interactive piece where we kind of ask you about, is this maybe embodied practice or rooted in the eating disorder, as after we've kind of gone through our information for the slides. And then again, as Erin mentioned, having some discussion or questions at the end. So to get started, we'll talk about exercise. As we know, exercise outside of the context of an eating disorder is something that is seen as a healthy lifestyle choice and is encouraged or recommended for many different reasons. As we know, it can have an impact on our mood, our health, our physical mobility and ability to move and function in our lives as well. However, it can also be a prominent characteristic in eating disorders. So we'll dive into more of that later, but how is exercise seen in the eating disorder context? Sometimes there's a history of overexercise, current exercise compulsion or exercise to compensate. Sometimes there can be moderate exercise. There can also be a resistance to movement or exercise, as well as a history of movement, but eager to get back into it or to get fit. So that's sometimes how it's seen in the context of eating disorders. So diving in a little bit more into this, there are different types of exercise in relation to eating disorders. There are some stats around 80% of patients with anorexia nervosa and 55% of those with bulimia nervosa engage in unhealthy exercise patterns. There's not a lot of research out there yet on binge eating disorder, but anecdotally, there is a lot of times where somebody with binge eating disorder is exercising for several hours a day to kind of compensate or to change their body or to move or to compensate for things that they've eaten as well. So we can say that that statistic is probably in there somewhere as well. And there are two dimensions of unhealthy exercise that usually we see within the eating disorder population. One of them is that quantitative or the excessive amount, meaning that there's aspects such as the duration, the intensity, or frequency. That can look like needing to run for a certain amount of time or take a certain number of steps a day, every day, even with that. And the intensity is maybe more than maybe somebody else that they may be moving with or exercising with. And then there's that compulsive nature of it or the qualitative nature of exercise and eating disorders, where there's a psychological aspect such as motivators for the exercise and experiencing guilt or anxiety when unable to engage in the exercise. So again, that compulsion, that drive, that need to move or exercise is there. And then that guilt or anxiety is present when there is something that interferes with the ability to move your body or exercise as you normally would. So looking at when is exercising emotion-driven behavior, from a concept from Renfrew, we kind of look at eating disorders as an emotional disorder, meaning that there are reasons why the behaviors are there. Excuse me. Exercise also fits into that too, with being an emotion-driven behavior, which means that those are behaviors that we do driven from an emotion to provide a short-term relief, but is not beneficial in the long run. Again, I got a little tickle in my throat. The strong emotions tell us or drive us to engage in a specific behavior, sometimes before we even have a chance to think about it. So you think about exercise as that emotion-driven behavior is when someone is feeling an emotion, turns to exercise to provide that relief. That could be going for a walk, that could be doing sit-ups, that could be doing different things that maybe, are that driving factor in there. And then if you're feeling that there's a certain amount of time that you should exercise, around that, or that you feel that it's emotion driven, that can be a sign that maybe you need to work on that relationship with exercise as well, where that's kind of your go-to sticking point for movement. So according to the National Eating Disorders Association, there are some warning signs or symptoms of compulsive exercise, meaning that exercise significantly interferes with important activities. So meaning that you may be avoiding social activities, you may be late to work or needing to leave work or those type of things. And so it's out of balance with those activities that also are part of your values. It occurs at inappropriate times or inappropriate settings, meaning it may be pouring down rain. There may be an ice storm. I was talking with somebody in upstate New York yesterday, and they were having some snow where, the inappropriate time or inappropriate setting may be there. And then there's that significant or that drive to exercise despite potential risk of injury or not being able to be seen if it's late at night and that sort of thing. Or when an individual continues to exercise despite injury or other medical complications. Again, this is sometimes seen in sports. If you're an athlete or that sort of thing, wanting to kind of push yourself with that injury, or even in the general population where maybe there's some shin splints or things that you couldn't help that happen, but you continue to fight and not allow your body that rest that is needed based on the energy. And again, sometimes there's that intense anxiety, depression, irritability, or those feelings of guilt or distress if unable to exercise. So again, if you're not able to exercise, your anxiety goes up, which means that we're not able to sit with our anxiety at that base level or those intense emotions that come up. We immediately need to run and move our bodies or exercise. And then again, maintaining that excessive or rigid exercise regimen, meaning that it has to be a certain number, it has to be a certain type of exercise or movement or physical activity to even think about it. But there's a lot of rules around it. For example, if you're walking out in public or running, and every time you see a bench, you have to do some sort of activity with that bench that's there, meaning that it can be rigid or excessive, even though your body may be saying, hey, I need to rest, or let's kind of pause here and keep, take some time. So a lot of times we see that in that overt exercise. So openly and deliberately engaging in exercise to lose weight or burn calories. So again, the example would be a planned exercise. I need to go and do this for this amount of time. The covert exercise is sometimes that activity that is done in secret. So doing sit-ups behind closed doors, waking up in the middle of the night to go exercise so people don't know that you're exercising, doing wall sits when you go to the bathroom, just those different times of getting in that activity that is in secret, partly because somebody is not necessarily watching, but is there and kind of maybe helping to hold you accountable for not moving your body as much. And then a persistent restlessness. So this appears to be beyond that voluntarily control, so highly repetitious and constant. So the pacing, the fidgeting, sometimes just like fidgeting your legs or constantly moving around, not being able to sit in different settings or sitting for a long amount of times that you need to get up and stand. And there can be that persistent restlessness. And so these are ways that patterns are present, but maybe they're being missed by providers or even missed by you as being emotion driven or avoidance in our activities and how we engage with movement or with our bodies in general. So again, looking at if we are, using exercise as avoidance or emotion driven, there can be some consequences of that over exercise or over movement of our body, and particularly with eating disorder recovery too. There is a thing such as having too much of anything can have an harmful impact. So part of the over exercise can be those physical side effects, that dehydration, fatigue, loss of menstrual cycle, those skeletal injuries, the bone splints. I'm trying to think of stress fractures, those type of things that come up. Heart condition, so a very low heart rate, even though you're an athlete, your heart rate may be low, which means that it doesn't have the strength because we're maybe not feeding ourselves, or we're over exercising and not allowing our bodies to heal, which causes that tissue damage or that increased risk of bruising. Sometimes a joint pain or those nutritional deficiencies, and then metabolic changes. Well, we know that happens is if we're not feeding our body enough, and then we're providing and exercising, engaging more movement than what our body is taking in, our body naturally will slow down our metabolism to reduce starvation, or that self-induced starvation. Even though our body is maybe not physically starved because we are feeding it, we're not feeding it enough to allot for the activity or movement that we are engaging in, regardless of your body weight, shape, or size. And then there are the emotional side effects of overexercise, that increase in anxiety or guilt if you're unable to exercise. So again, that emotional toll that's there. Depression, if you are injured or something like that and having to take a break, that depression or that mood is impacted because you're not able to exercise. Interference with relationship or responsibilities. Again, that can also be isolating and leading to a feeling of loneliness because you're possibly going to exercise or move your body over going out to eat with friends, or going to that concert, or just feeling that drive to do those different things, which then impacts other areas. And then viewing exercise as a have to instead of a want to. That sometimes takes the joy out of the exercise or movement if you're viewing it of I have to do this, or I should be doing this, instead of I want to. An example could be I have to go run in order to call it exercise or movement, instead of like, I really want to be playing Frisbee with my kids, or I really want to be just walking around and enjoying nature. And maybe if you're like photography, like taking pictures of like what you see and, just being more present and engaged. And again, the emotional toll and side effect that takes. So I'm going to pass it on to Kristen to talk about when exercise is embodied.
Thank you, Becky. So when we're thinking about exercise, thinking about like, when is it embodied? When is it adaptive and helpful? When we're thinking about exercise, we want this to be something that is enjoyable, an activity that you enjoy doing, that you want to be able to do. When you think about different forms of exercise, there's the mindful walk. That's always one of my favorites to talk about because it allows you to connect with your body. It allows you to connect with nature. You can process events or situations during it. And when we're thinking about exercise, we want to make sure that it's being participated in an appropriate time frame with the additional nutrients that are needed. When you think about exercise, I want you to ask yourself, like, why do I want to do this right now? Is this enjoyable? Is this something I want to do? Why? And that can be really helpful. Do you want to go to the next one, Becky? When we're thinking about, the benefits of exercise, joyful movement and activity, they play a very critical role in your overall well-being. We know that there are physical and emotional benefits. When we think about the physical benefits of exercise, you may have heard some of these things, such as like the stronger bones and muscles and joints. It can reduce your risk of fractures. There's a better recovery time from illnesses. It helps reduce the risk of chronic diseases. It can also help to enable your hunger cues and make sure that you're getting more hunger cues. Thinking about the emotional benefits can help improve your mood. It can increase your social connections if you're exercising with others. That's always a really great one. Thinking about how it can relieve some of our stress and anxiety in the moment, maybe being able to process something that's coming up for you, and it can overall improve our sleep patterns. You want to go to the next one? So when we're thinking about developing an appropriate routine, this is the FIT principle. This is always used to help develop that exercise routine. And when you think about the FIT principle, it's FITT, and it stands for frequency, intensity, time, and type. So I want you to ask yourself some of these questions when developing that routine, or even evaluating, is my routine appropriate right now? So how often am I exercising, or will I plan to exercise? You know, what's the intensity? Is this low? Is it moderate? Is it intense? How long am I planning to do this for? And what type of activities am I going to be doing? I want it to be something that you enjoy doing, like I've said, but also things like changing it up and adding new things to your routine can be really helpful. It kind of gets boring when we're doing the same thing all the time. So being able to change that up, one, for yourself, but also for the body too. So some questions I want you to ask before engaging in any mindful movement is, do I want to move right now? Like really asking yourself that. Why do I want to do it? What signals can my body send to indicate that I am ready to be done with moving? So at what point, am I doing this for too long and I'm feeling like I'm done with it? Am I taking care of myself in the moment? Is this something that I would consider as helpful or unhelpful? Am I properly fueled enough to move right now? So thinking about the nutrients, and making sure that we're getting those additional movements and nutrients, but also thinking too, my favorite question is, if my body didn't change, would I still do this? And my hope is that thinking about these questions can really help you start thinking about your intent behind the movement. Thank you. Go ahead, Becky. I'll send this to you to take it over for the nutritional part.
All right. So as Kristen kind of mentioned in the last slide, we need to think about, are we adequately fueled for this? A lot of times whenever we are starting to move our bodies or engaging in physical activity or exercise, we do need to increase our nutrition intake, which may mean adding snacks before or after the planned activity, carrying fuel or food in case of experiencing hunger throughout the day or hunger throughout the activity, so that we are doing that, or adding exchanges to meals. There are a couple of ways to kind of adjust for our physical activity or our exercise. And one of the important things of having the adequate nutrition and adjusting our nutritional intake is, in the previous slide, we talked about it can increase your hunger cues. It can also decrease them. However, our nutrient intake is still present and there and needed to make sure we're meeting our nutritional needs, as well as when we are moving our body, we are expending energy. And so we need to make sure we're putting that energy back in so that we can have those benefits of exercise, of improving our bone health, helping with our joints and muscles and all of those different things. And if we're not adequately fueled, our body is actually using the muscle that sometimes there's that myth of well, I won't build muscle, or I need to have a lot of protein. But if we're not adequately fueled, the activity is not actually helping our bodies to build that strength or help our mental energy and capacity if we're not adequately fueled. And so some signs of the maladaptive exercise behaviors. We address some of these, but again, just thinking about as you look at that embodied practice or looking to find that relationship with exercise and movement is, that perfectionism of, I've exercised every single hour for the day for the past 3 years. That could also be maladaptive or not embodied, and looking at why that is and what is the intention behind that, and talking to that with your team. Or having rules around the amount of exercise or foods that you eat. I never eat sugary foods after 7 p.m. And if I do, I probably need to exercise more the next day. That compulsive behavior we kind of mentioned about earlier, feelings of inadequacy. I could run faster if I lost a few more pounds. Where if we talk about fueling our body, losing weight may not actually help you to run faster or meet that goal you have within your sport or in your activity. Difficulty having fun, passing up invitations to parties or invitations for social events. based on needing to go to the gym or needing to meet that exercise or that requirement. And then problems within relationships. Maybe your spouse or your partner is complaining that you spend too much time exercising or not enough time with your family. Or maybe you're not present with your family or partners because you're thinking about like, oh, I need to be exercising or I need to be doing this. And so you're mentally not there and present with them. And again, as Krista mentioned, to kind of help hone in on, is it maladaptive, emotion driven, or avoidance of my emotions, is if my body wouldn't change, would I still do this type of activity and exercise? So I'm going to pass it to Kristen to kind of talk about how do we improve our relationship with exercise.
Thank you, Becky. So when we're thinking about our relationship with exercise, some suggestions on helping improve that relationship can be to start thinking about the most important part of exercise is that it needs to be enjoyable. I will say this all the time because I want this to be something that is a self-compassionate activity. It's something that you enjoy to do. It's something that you want to do. It's allowing you to connect with yourself, your body, others, and the environment. I want you to start thinking about, like, how do I incorporate exercise back into my routine slowly? A lot of times people will want to, set these goals and you want to get to these goals so quickly, but this is not an all or nothing situation. This is not something that we can go from nothing to all or all to nothing. We need to find that middle ground. We need to think about how can we start to build that endurance and work on the body, the muscles, the bones, the joints. I want you to also make sure that you're incorporating mindful activities. When we're thinking about an exercise routine and your relationship with exercise, a lot of times the mindful component is missing. So making sure that you're really adding some sort of mindful movement in there can be really helpful. My other favorite one is bringing someone with you to hold you accountable, and it helps with the social participation. Thinking about, if I'm doing something alone, am I more prone to wanting to do more or do it longer or adding different things? But if you have someone with you, they can help hold you accountable to it. And then changing your routine up. I want you to incorporate different activities that you enjoy. Like I said, it gets boring when we're doing the same thing all the time. So adding something new can help change it for your body, but also for you. Thanks. You want to move to the next one, Becky? So the do's and don'ts of exercise. This is something that I really like to kind of just map out. I'm really thinking about, what's helpful, what's not helpful. So when we think about exercise, we want you to do activities that you enjoy. Like I said, doing things that are best for you are the ones that you enjoy doing. Doing something with someone, like I said, to hold you accountable. It also helps you to be honest with your supports. Doing something and starting off of it moderately with a few minutes of exercise and then slowly increasing that. I want to make sure that you are incorporating water before, during, and after exercise. Thinking about hydration, that is so important when we're incorporating movement. And also thinking about adding nutrients to your meal plan. And do cool down after your exercise. So thinking about this, it's really important to think about, stretching, but also at the end, having that cool down. Our body can't go from, moving at a certain pace, then all of a sudden stopping. So that warm up is so important to lower the heart rate. And then when we're starting to think about things that we wouldn't do and things that, we would ask to think about, is this really not helpful for me? And that would be to not begin exercising without warming up, to prepare your body and mind. Thinking about not trying to race someone or get competitive when you're first starting out, because that can really increase your risk of injury. Trying not to fixate over the weight loss, calories, time frame, mileage, changing your appearance of your body. All of these things, all of these numbers and things like that can really interfere with your relationship with exercise. Not exercising if your mindset is that exercise is being used in this moment as a reward, or if it's being used as a punishment, or if it's being used as compensation. And don't let yourself get bored. Add new things to that routine. And don't forget about the appropriate nutrition. So what we're going to do now is we are going to, I think the other way, Becky, there we go. We're going to start working through some scenarios regarding exercise. I want you to consider these scenarios if they are embodied exercise or if they're eating disorder driven. So this first one asks, someone's kind of thinking to themselves, I'm feeling really tired today, so I'm going to rest instead of exercise. So I want you to think about this. Would this be embodied practice or eating disordered? So Becky, you want to put the answer up? It is embodied practice. When we think about this scenario, you're connecting with your body. You're looking at it as, I'm feeling tired and my body probably isn't ready to do any type of movement right now. And thinking about it, rest is just as important as exercise. And if you're tired, I want you to ask yourself, am I really going to enjoy doing this if I'm not feeling well right now in this moment? I'm tired? Probably not. You want to go to the next one?
All right, the next one to kind of help recognize is it embodied practice or eating disorder is a statement, I worked out today so I can eat unhealthily. Is this embodied practice or eating disorder? All right, if you went with eating disordered thoughts and things, that is appropriate. We hear a lot of this around just different rules and regulations around food or thoughts around food of allowing yourself to have different foods if you based on your activity or workout. However, all foods fit, even regardless of movement or activity. We start limiting foods based on our activity or allowing foods based on our activity. We start to set ourselves up to maybe binge or avoid those foods or have more anxiety or distress or a hierarchy within our foods, where some foods are deemed more appropriate than others on different days, and doesn't allow for that freedom within our food choices, that recovery or that embodied practice around our listening to our bodies and honoring that allows for. All right, next up we have, is this embodied practice or eating disordered? I will have another snack today because I'm moving my body more than I anticipated. Plus, I'm slightly hungrier than usual. This is embodied practice. This is being able to listen to those interoceptive cues around your hunger cues and practice having an additional snack. Even if you may have met meal plan, even if it's not on your meal plan or part of your daily activity, our body needs fuel. And one of those ways that it tells us is, sending out those hunger cues, as well as just being aware of how much movement maybe you've engaged in that day, whether it was intentional or unintentional, and having that fuel for that body so that we don't undernourish ourselves and risk of injury or other practices that can actually cause more damage to our health and well-being by not listening to those hunger cues. All right, next up, we have walking is one way I can move my body and connect to it. Is this embodied practice around exercise or movement, or maybe eating disorder driven? All right, if you went with embodied practice, that is accurate. Walking is a great form of exercise and can be effective in improving the overall health for many. It also provides innumerable physical, mental, and emotional benefits as well. As Kristen kind of talked about earlier too, it is also a way to maybe connect to what are you feeling emotionally, and connecting with nature and being more mindful and aware of what is happening in that moment. It's also, sometimes less impactful for our bodies to go for a walk rather than running or jogging or riding a bike or doing some of those things. And it's also a way to connect maybe with others who you may not be able to join you on activity as well. So again, it's more embodied practice and asking like, what does my body need in this moment? And how do I need to connect with it as well? All right, Kristen, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So for the next one, is this embodied practice or eating disorder? I'm going to exercise now because once the day gets going, I won't have time. Plus, the best time to be active is early in the morning. So thinking about this, is this embodied practice or eating disorder? So Becky, you want to put the next one up? Awesome. So this is eating disorder because there is no one optimal time to be active. You know, the best time to incorporate movement is a time that works for you. You know, for some people it is early in the day, and some people it's in the middle of the day, and for some people it's in the evening. You know, there are benefits of how it serves you in that moment. So I want you to choose whatever works for you. You know, however, thinking about this, you know, in this scenario, I'm thinking if we don't have the time in the day to incorporate it, maybe today is not the day that we do that. You know, there's always tomorrow, and not forcing ourselves to do something just because we have to do it that day. Go to the next one. Okay, so the next one, is this embodied practice or eating disorder? I didn't sweat as much as I normally do. Maybe that's a sign my body needs a little more fluid today. So thinking again, is this embodied practice or eating disorder? It's embodied practice. You know, sweating or perspiring is not necessarily an indicator of exertion. You know, perspiring is your body's way of cooling itself. You know, something to think about is if I'm not sweating, am I dehydrated? You know, dehydration may lead to health and heated related illnesses, and it's strongly associated with fatigue, especially during exercise. You know, some signs of dehydration can include dark urine, small urine volume, muscle cramps, reduced sweating, increased heart rate, headaches, and nausea. And again, while we're doing this, I want you to really be connecting with your body and seeing, are there signs and indications that my body is struggling in this moment? And is this not helpful? Okay, you want to go to the next one? Go ahead, Becky. I'll have you take this one over.
Yeah, I was gonna say this one sounds great for a dietitian here. Embodied practice or eating disorder around this, I should eat these carbs as they won't help me build muscle. Eating disorder or embodied practice? All right, that one is eating disordered. And part of it, I think you can all relate to in the exercise or even fitness world where they tout like don't eat carbs, protein will help build muscle. However, carbohydrates help fill your tank. They're the number one energy source of fuel and should be the dominant part of meals or snacks. It also helps to fuel that energy that you're needing whenever you are exercising because we will be using that glucose when you're moving your body to help those cells get the energy. And if you're not getting enough carbs, your muscle actually starts getting broken down to help fuel your body. And so again, if you're not getting the carbs and we're not, needing fuel, our body will break down the muscle. And so it's actually kind of counterintuitive because if you're wanting to build muscle, we also have to be adequately fueled and with the right fuel within that. All right. This next one, embodied practice or eating disorder. I just exercised and I don't have an appetite for my snack. I'll just skip it today. Thinking about, is this embodied practice or eating disorder? All right, this is more related to the eating disorder. Again, if you are exercising or moving your body, there is a window of opportunity to replenish that tank or that fuel place. And part of that is by having a snack that is carbohydrate rich within that 30 minutes after exercise. and replenishing those stores that you lost so that your body can adequately repair and do the processes that it needs to do to actually have the benefits of exercise. If we're not adequately fueled, we also sometimes will have poor cognition, slowed response to things, and that sort of thing. So having that fuel after we exercise is helpful. And if you're, not having an appetite, again, we talked a little bit earlier about how exercise, we do need to fuel our body, but also exercise can impact our appetite by either increasing it or decreasing it. Just because you're not hungry for that snack doesn't mean that you need to miss it or skip it. All right, so as we wrap up, and we'll give you some time for questions, Kristen, take it away with just some of the takeaway messages from today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Becky. So some of the takeaway messages that my hope is that you were able to take away today include that exercise needs to be enjoyable. It's a self-compassionate activity and allows you to connect with yourself, others, and the environment. I want you to start letting go of some of your old beliefs and be open to new beliefs regarding exercise and building a new relationship with it. Bring curiosity to exercise. Try new activities that are fun. You may be used to associating exercise with the have-tos and the shoulds, that you don't even recognize what activities you truly find enjoyable. I also want you to listen to your body. Stop exercising when your body feels tired. Remember to take days off. Listen to your body and allow yourself to get in the appropriate amount of rest in between your exercise days. And also knowing the difference between fatigue and pain. Something I want you to think about is if you're in pain, please stop. Remember this acronym RICE: rest, ice, compression, and elevate. But also checking in with your healthcare provider if you are in any pain. Incorporating structure. This is so important in the beginning of recovery to develop an exercise plan with your treatment team or trained professionals. With this structure, I do want you to remember that you can be flexible with it, but providing some sort of structure so you're not going, again, from this all or nothing or this nothing to all, and finding that middle ground. You want to hit the next one, Becky? And the next one, again, is here we go, is being flexible with your structured routine. Exercise isn't always a rigorous cardio session in the gym. If you're walking more than usual while on vacation, spending a day doing chores around the house, I'm thinking right now it's fall, so there's probably a lot of leaves that need to be raked, and any other daily activity, that counts too. I want you to think more about the movement of it. Adding variety to your workouts. Trying new things like group classes. I really like the idea of a group class because you can do this with someone. You're going in, you're doing what is given in that situation. My hope is that you're doing it appropriately. And then when it's over, you're done with the exercise and there isn't this idea of wanting to do more. Thinking about some strength training or even a new sport. Being open to sharing your exercise plan with your supports can be very important and helpful to hold you accountable. Being social. Avoid the secretive exercise and ask for support when needed. Having a workout buddy, such as a family member or friend, may be an enjoyable way to spend time together. Completing the appropriate amount of nutrition after exercise. Instead of exercising to eat, make sure you're exercising before you're eating before your exercise to fuel your body, and also after exercise to aid in the recovery process. Ensure there's proper hydration before, during, and after activity. And know what you like. Reduce the comparisons and don't feel pressured to have to do the same type of intensity as others or feeling like you have to do the same type of exercise as others. And being honest with yourself about your intentions of exercise. Even those with a healthy relationship with exercise may have days with increased urges. If your intention to exercise is not beneficial, then I would recommend taking the day off. And I also want you to work with your team to set some small, achievable goals. So that is some of our takeaway messages from today.
Becky and Kristen, thank you both so much for this. I feel like this is a topic that definitely comes up all the time in eating disorder recovery. And I think it's such an important one, especially, I'm thinking about one of the things we talk about a lot in treatment with the end of the year is like being careful of all of those gym ads that start to come up and resolutions people set. So we do have a couple of questions we can get started with. Please, though, if you have other questions, please add them into the chat. Someone just said like they're recognizing that this is really showing them that they're not ready to get back into exercise, that they really were only doing it for that intention. That intention to lose weight, if somebody is looking, to increase maybe activity in their life without feeling like it's exercise, any ideas for ways they can start to do that where maybe there's a little less focus on weight and shape?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And that does come up very often. I can imagine sitting here and hearing us speak today, kind of thinking about, is this appropriate? Am I doing this for the appropriate reasons? And is this helpful in recovery? So what I would start to think about too is the intent behind why you're doing it, right? So, maybe if that intent with certain activities is more associated with weight loss or whatever it may be, start thinking about other things that could be fun. Like I always say, if you have a pup or a dog, walking the dog and, kind of thinking about going out with a friend for a walk, or trying something new like yoga. Or, if you're someone who likes to dance, maybe there's different types of dance classes. Finding things that you would enjoy doesn't have to necessarily be all of this exercise with that intent for weight loss. So I hope that answered your question.
I think it did. And I do love that idea of like doing things for the enjoyment, not for, any other reason. Just I like to dance, so I'm going to take this salsa class or whatever it might be. Or I've never danced, I'm going to take this salsa class and see how I do. Someone else asked just about the snacks before and after. When they're not feeling hungry or if they feel like it's making them nauseous beforehand, any tips like for that?
Yeah, I think that goes, I know in the questions, I think that goes with just kind of knowing your body and that embodied practice. If it's making you feel nauseous before, is maybe working with your team on other ways and other timing of fueling your body. If you're not necessarily hungry after, or it makes you nauseous after too, like working with your team around that as well. Because it could be things that you're having. And so this comes up a lot too, like I'm nauseous, I don't want to eat after, or I eat before and do the snack, I end up like getting sick. So again, looking at maybe the intensity of the exercise too. It may be too intense at that moment for you. But I think working with your team around the timing of that fuel, because yes, there are those windows of opportunity, but if it's making you sick and nauseous, that's also not appealing too, and it's not honoring your body. So just kind of having that discussion and open discussion with them can be helpful.
I love that. And it really is so much about that team approach. And we have another question about that, specifically if you've got an injury, you've suffered an injury, maybe it's related to the eating disorder, maybe it's not, but thinking about who could you add in to your team? Who would you all suggest adding into your team when you're starting to get back into those activities you were doing before? Maybe you're aware you're doing them for the appropriate intentions and you just want to know like, well, what is that level of pain that's appropriate because, I'm starting up something new or I'm using that muscle that I've been resting for a while. And what is like, this is cause for concern, I'm going a little too hard. Who could they kind of reach out to at that point and add into their team?
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind with that, because that's a great question of if I'm injured and I'm on a team sport or just injured and wanting to return to activity, is if you had been engaged in physical therapy for that injury, to make sure you're working with that physical therapist, because they can kind of tell you like, oh yeah, you can expect some pain as we're doing this. If it gets to this level, we may need to back off or kind of readjust what we're doing. If you're on a sports team, sometimes that may come in to, I think the sports team name is maybe the personal trainer, but they're still within that team sport as well and kind of connecting with them. But again, if you are on a sport and kind of returning to that, using your team for support too, and just listening to your body and talking with a coach. Kristen, I'm not sure if there's anybody else to add, but outside of maybe the physical therapist, if it's not already on the team.
Yeah, I would add the same thing, Becky. I definitely think working with the physical therapist, but also you could even talk with your like healthcare provider, and also, if you're thinking about speaking with your nutritionist or your therapist about the emotional component to this as well. I think there is definitely a difference between, pain and then some soreness. You are getting some soreness after certain exercises, and that can be appropriate. But when we're starting to get pain, especially in the moment when you're doing it or after, and you're feeling like, this might not be right, making sure you're definitely checking in, because that can be an indicator that, maybe I'm doing this exercise incorrectly or I'm not ready for it in this moment.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the more people we have on our team supporting us, kind of the more helpful it can be. We do have one question though about a time when maybe a team member isn't the most helpful. So somebody said they started working actually with a trainer just to help and kind of keep them, in a good area to not go too intense, but that this person also, is giving some nutrition advice where maybe they're not totally qualified to give that nutrition advice, and kind of how do you broach that subject when you're working with someone, they've been really helpful, and then they start saying these things that you're like, oh, this is really reinforcing some of those eating disorder beliefs.
Yeah, that comes up a lot whenever you may be working with a physical therapist, personal trainer, like those aspects to kind of help in that performance, or help making sure that you're using those tools and working and using those muscles that you're trying to work or use. I can't even think. Play the sport appropriately and as you need to. And so I think it would be helpful of setting the boundary with them and say, hey, I appreciate what you're doing, and I already have a dietitian on my team that is really providing me this support. Or even if you have that close relationship with them, letting them know that it is actually triggering you and counterintuitive to the work that you've already done, and having that conversation. If that doesn't work, sometimes it is helpful to elicit the other team members to maybe call and give that person and have a conversation with that person too, of like how that's impacting you, to kind of have that backup whenever you're needing it. But really, I think being transparent and setting the boundary with them of like, I already have a team member on my team that's providing that nutrition information for me, and navigating it that way as well.
Yeah, I think that's so great, and like being able to really set that limit. And I do think it's always helpful just to remind people that, there's a lot of people out in the world that do not get dietetic training and yet are giving out nutrition and dietetic advice. So making sure you are going to a registered dietitian who also does have a background in treating eating disorders, because not everyone's going to know what's needed for recovery. Somebody else kind of bringing up the idea of rest days. A lot of guilt is coming up for them when they're when they're taking these rest days. Any tips on how they can help kind of tolerate that guilt and still take that rest day?
Yeah, absolutely. Rest days are so important. And something that I always like to remind people is when you're taking a rest day, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're laying down all day. Our bodies are still being so active in what we need to do every day. If it's going up and down the steps, or, having to get in the car and drive somewhere, or, having, like I said, to walk the dog, or doing things just around the house that we have to do as part of our daily activity, your body is still moving. When we're thinking about these rest days, what we're resting is your heart rate, and thinking about when you are incorporating exercise, that's increasing your heart rate and the cardiovascular activity. So just reminding yourself that your body needs the rest, because it is always moving. Even when we're sleeping and we're rolling over and things, we're always constantly moving. And, I think what could be really helpful in those moments is to do some of those reappraisals. Here's my automatic thought, and here's some reappraisals for that.
I love that, Kristen. And it might go along with this also, but someone that kind of spent a long time away from exercise because of unhealthy uses of it previously, they now know what it is that they enjoy doing simply for the act of doing it, and are still feeling kind of paralyzed by that fear and kind of that habitual avoidance of any kind of increase in activity. Any ideas for how to maybe like even start to take steps to reincorporate those activities that feel more like nurturing in the sense of doing them for the right reason?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think, going back again to the automatic thoughts and some of those appraisals can be really helpful, but also thinking, this is something that I enjoy doing. And then also thinking about, would it be helpful if I do some of these things I enjoy with people I enjoy doing things with, right? So if there's the friends, the family, and the support, so this way the intent can also have that connection, that social participation, and they can also help hold you accountable to, incorporating this in slowly. I can imagine, that fear, that all or nothing of like, I was doing something maybe maladaptively, I stopped, I'm aware of it, but now I just don't know how to navigate that again. And trying to really, using that fit principle, even of like, where can I structure this into my routine that it's going to be helpful?
Awesome. And with that idea of routine, would you suggest someone continues to use kind of that fit principle if they're looking at kind of, okay, I do have a pretty scheduled and maybe regimented like plan for when I'm going to be exercising, but I don't know, is it just I do better with a schedule and I like to have things kind of mapped out versus, oh, this might be moving into some disordered area?
That's a really great question because I can totally get that, right? We're sitting here and I'm telling you, I think structure is so important and I want you to be able to have a routine, at the same time, there is this idea of being flexible within that routine, and I always say, okay, you gave yourself a time frame and you thought you were going to be incorporating the movement today, but then all of a sudden it downpoured and you're like, yeah, I don't really want to go out today. It's kind of cold out, it's rainy, and being flexible with that rather than saying, I have this structure, I have this routine. It says today's Wednesday, I need to do it right now. Then that would tell me that maybe we're being a little bit too rigid with this structure. And that's what we need to start challenging. So again, this whole gray area of trying to find like, how can we have this routine to give you some structure, but also being flexible within that structure.
Yeah, I always talk, Kristen, I'll talk about it as like rigid flexibility or like flexible rigidity, where it's like, think about a skyscraper in LA. They're designed to be able to move a little bit, but they're not wobbling in the wind. It's just so they don't fall over when there's an earthquake. So kind of that same idea. And then Becky, we did have a question if someone asked if you could again kind of emphasize why the carbs are important for exercise. They know you talked about it a little bit, but just kind of a little bit more on that.
Yeah, carbohydrates, that's a great question. Again, one of those, I think, misnomers or myths that of like, hey, let's have protein if we're exercising to actually build the muscle. But we do need carbs. Carbs are kind of the foundation of our energy for our house and our bodies, if you think about it that way. It's the number one energy source for our brain. Our brain doesn't function as well if we're only giving it protein and fats. We need all of those, but it is the number one energy source, that glucose that comes from carbohydrates. And so carbohydrates are important for that factor, as well as if we're having too much protein in our diet, which is sometimes comes along with exercise and that sort of thing, it impacts our kidneys, and our kidneys are having to flush out the byproducts of the protein whenever our bodies are using that for fuel. And so that impacts our nourishment as well. And so those carbohydrates are important for that, as well as our storage form of energy is glucose. If we're not getting enough carbs, we don't have that storage form, which can lead to feeling fatigued and tired during the activity as well. So another couple of things that you can add to your repertoire of reappraisals whenever your eating disorder is like, hey, I don't need to eat carbs, I need to eat protein. It's all in that balance of that as well.
Thanks, Becky. I feel like there's been so much throughout the years of just like misinformation about that. I think it's so important. And I know we have time for one last question. So just what if someone's seeing a physical therapist, they're seeing an athletic trainer, and they don't know about eating disorders? Any ways they could advocate? Maybe they've said, hey, I have an eating disorder. That's not the most helpful thing for you to say to me. And the person's still like, I don't know anything about that. And they keep saying things. Any resources y'all might kind of direct them towards or sharing with these people on their team?
One of the resources that comes to mind is Renfrew does professional webinars. And so maybe routing them to that resource for the professional. There's also the NITA website that provides a lot of education as well. And then there are, Krista may know more, but I would believe that there are some sports dietitians or things out there too that maybe have resources on their websites as well. And maybe advocating if you are in a sport working with an athletic trainer, like, hey, could you get some experts in to kind of train on eating disorders? Because I'm feeling this this need, because you're probably not the only one that's feeling that way on the team. And so having that, I don't know, Kristen, if you have other resources in mind.
Yeah, Becky, I was thinking the exact same things that you were. The other thing I would think about too is just really advocating for yourself in the moment, and whoever this trainer is, the physical therapist, whatever it may be, and really sharing with them, I understand that they're giving you these exercises or whatever it may be to build that muscle or that strength, but also advocating that, maybe this hasn't been helpful for me, or, maybe it would be helpful if that person can check in with, your nutritionist or your therapist, or learning more about eating disorders. I definitely agree of sending them towards like the Renfrew's website, some of our professional webinars, absolutely, all of that.
Yeah, and I think it's so helpful to have those resources. And I love our professional webinars because so many people can access them. Because like we talked about before, not everybody has training in this. And, that's not a bad thing on their part. It's just something they need to grow in. So hopefully they'll be willing to hear from you and check it out. And I know we are at time. So Kristen and Becky's contact information is up on the screen. So please feel free to reach out if you all have any more questions. And on behalf of myself and the Renfrew Center Foundation, Becky and Kristen, I want to thank you both so much for presenting today. And I want to thank all of our participants for joining us and hearing today. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.